Without further ado, I'm going to toss it to B. Sanders to talk about the downtown park.
Thank you, Hank. We're really excited to be here tonight and present to you the first draft of the 3 downtown park concepts. And we talked to you just recently about all of the public input, and so this is a result of that input. And our goal tonight is to get direction from you. We've met with several other groups so far, and we'd like you to help us finalize how we revise and tweak these so that they get into their final form for the 3 concepts that will be unveiled then at Derby Days. And so far, these have been looked at by the Downtown Park Steering Committee, city staff, the mayor, and also a joint meeting of the Parks and Trails Commission and the Arts and Culture Commission. So they've had quite a few eyes on them already, so you're the final group that we will be presenting this to. As I was saying, these are pretty early concepts, even though they look pretty refined. There's still a lot of things that we know need to happen to them. And I'm going to also be showing you some early ideas on the art for the park. And so you'll see that the art is in a pretty early stage because the artist had to wait until the concepts got gelled somewhat before she could start her work. So we'll show you that, and I don't think that was in the material that you received already. So what I would like to do first is to, we've got about 35 slides. So we'll go through, explain the concepts to you, explain the art concepts, and then while we're doing that, I'd like you to be thinking about 3 key questions, which then we'll discuss at the end. So the key questions are, which concept do you find the most compelling and appropriate for downtown Redmond? These are pretty simple. Next, which design or design elements do you like the best and why? And finally, which design or design elements do you like the least and why? And feel free to interrupt me, though, as we go along if we need to clarify anything in the presentation. So the consultants have been really fascinated, I think, by this sort of juxtaposition of the really natural environment that we have here in Redmond and then the real high-tech environment that we have. And what's interesting to hear from their point of view is that the natural environment is really visible. You see the Education Hill and Bear Creek and the Heron Rookery, and so they're really aware of this greenscape that we're surrounded by in the downtown park. But on the other hand, the technological side of Redmond, which we hear a lot about, but it's invisible if you're actually driving through Redmond as a first-time visitor. So they've been playing with this idea of how do you make both of these things visible and integrate them at the same time. Come here. So they started with this concept diagram, and you may have seen this before, in which they analyzed circulation patterns, both vehicle and pedestrian, and also looked at the impact of the surrounding land uses like residential buildings or commercial buildings. And all of these things were then considered as we moved into the next steps. And this is what we looked at just a week or 2 ago, where we were looking at all of the public input on different elements within the park. So things like the kind of surfacing, whether it's grass or paved, the kind of water features that might be there, and so on. So the consultant team took the top 2 ranked items from each category and tried to incorporate these into the concepts. So you see for the space and surface, as we discussed before, it's a pretty good balance between lawn and paved surfaces. And then for water, splash pads or water jets and sculptural water features were both explored. For plantings, alleys of trees ranked really highly, as well as just landscape beds. Under furnishings, people really like the idea of the movable, lightweight furniture, as well as the wooden platforms. Under structures, people really, this was one of the highest ranking items, people really want that weather protection. Then lighting was really popular, and we haven't explored that yet, but it's still to come. Artwork, interactive artwork was very popular. So meanwhile, while the public input process was going on, PFS Studio was working on developing a series of concepts of just at this bubble diagram level of putting different elements next to each other to see how they would work. And so I won't go into these in much detail, but the following concepts are drawn from these three. They started with something like 13. They brought 6 or 7 to us, to staff to review, and we narrowed it down to 3 to ask them to continue working. So in each of these, the sort of yellow-green color is the paving. The medium green is grass. The dark green is landscape beds or trees. And then the hot pink is a pavilion. The little dashed blue line is a water feature. And the dashed red line is a stage. Got everything. So jumping into the concepts, and you may have had time to look at this, but as I mentioned, they were really fascinated with the natural world, and that included going back in historical time at what this site was many hundreds and probably thousands of years ago. And so these were just kind of a jumping off point. So we did have a conversation at our first meeting with some confusion about the idea that we were actually creating a bog, and that's not the case. So, but that historical situation where there was a very wet situation in our downtown area originally was bogs, and you can see in that upper right photo where you have these sort of floating almost islands of lush vegetation. And so PFS was inspired by that feeling, that really organic lines. And so what they played with in the concept then is to take sort of a very urban situation with the grid line, and you see that in the paving pattern. So you see the linear pattern on the ground surface, as well as the linear layout of the trees. And then they laid over that the rounded organic shapes. So here's a bigger version of that. And so the most striking thing about this, I think, is the Great Lawn. And so it really becomes the centerpiece of this design. And the interesting thing about it, it's actually raised a couple of feet off the ground and surrounded by a wooden boardwalk. So that wooden platform that we saw earlier in the public input, that's how it gets expressed in this design. So on either side then of this big circular pattern, there are steps that can then double as a seating arrangement. So there's space on the left side or west side of the site for a temporary stage. So what we found out is that performers and events planners like to be able to bring in a stage and place it wherever they want to, but in general, performers don't want to look into the evening sun. So we've settled pretty much on having this west end be the place that you'd put a stage, so the audience is looking toward the west, the performer looking to the east. And so this gives a very generous raised space for performances that could go either direction, actually. Then toward the right side of the drawing, you see another gray round circle, and that's actually a pavilion. And in each of these 3 examples, the pavilion is being designed by the artist. And so outside of that pavilion then is a space that could be wet with the water jets, so it could be dry or wet depending on the current use. And then it's got a seat wall along one edge of it. Along the northern edge, between the street and the Great Lawn, are a series of stone walls that are underneath the trees. And so it's something that helps to separate the interior part of the park from Redmond Way and feel a little safer and a little more enclosed that way. Then in that lower right corner is where we would have sort of cafe seating, basically, so that the Stonehouse restaurant, which is right next door, thank you, as well as the restaurants along Leary Way, folks could grab takeout and bring it over to this spot and eat outside on pretty days.
Ms. Allen.
Now the walls that are in between the trees on the northern edge, about how tall are we talking about?
They're just they're seat walls, so they're about 2 feet tall.
Okay.
Yeah. Any other questions on this site before we go on, or this concept?
Mr. Flynn.
So on the bottom of the diagram there, that's from the south side facing the park, is that right? I think we have 161st on the left.
Exactly,
Okay.
and that's Cleveland Street on the bottom.
Okay.
I guess if there was going to be a comment, I like the wood as opposed to a hard surface for the seating and the ring. That's really nice. I mean, it could even be structured wood, but just that texture and color.
Mr. Carson.
Well, I was going to ask about the seat walls. What kind of material is it envisioned exactly what it's going to be, or kind of along what lines?
The wood material would be a product called Ipe. I mean, it's a wood, but it's super hard.
It's an engineered wood.
No, it's a natural wood. It's a tropical, grown in plantations.
Oh, okay.
Wood. It's super hard. It doesn't degrade in weather like our woods do. And so we actually are using it in other sites in the city now, and our maintenance staff is pretty happy with it.
And to follow up on that, so that's what you're talking about for around the Great Lawn.
Yes.
So one of the issues that we will inevitably have is skateboarders and so forth. Are there any mechanism? I mean, there's obviously mechanisms but those are pretty. I don't know, not aesthetically pleasing to those who use it for other things.
We haven't gotten to that level of detail yet, so that would happen in the design phase.
Mr. Myers.
Just out of curiosity, are you using like ironwood or Purple Heart, or what are you using for the wood, the high density wood?
It's called Ipe. It's spelled IPE, and it is a tropical hardwood.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Oh, and then the seat walls. Sorry, what were they envisioned to be made out of?
Those seat walls along the northern side are stone.
Okay, and that's the southern edge as well.
Right. Yes. Yeah, but
there's quite a few of them, right? So.
Oops, I was trying to use a pointer.
Yeah.
Let me go back. So this gives you some photo ideas about this this concept. So up at the upper left, see if I've got it.
You have to point it up at the big one.
Oh, that's right. So that's what we talk about when we say an alley of trees. So you would be walking between 2 rows of big trees, and then the upper right corner is the idea of the wooden sort of bench wall, and then this steps is something that could, it's either for moving around or for sitting on, and then these are the sort of wooden platforms there at the bottom.
So, B, you mentioned that the Great Lawn is slightly elevated.
Yes.
1, 2, 3 steps, something like that.
2 feet total, so Usually use about 6 inches
Okay,
per step, so about 4 steps.
4 or 5 steps. And then are there steps all the way around it? Or are there just access steps? You know what I'm saying? Is it
Like on that front,
yeah.
on the east side there
I
were.
mean, I see those two little cutout things that look like steps there.
Yeah, so it looks like it's about a quarter of the circle on the left side, and then maybe about the equivalent on the right side, where you have the
Oh, yeah.
wavy line.
Yeah, the ridged looking.
And those are the two access points to the Great Lawn.
The steps, as well as there are 2 ramps. If you see the white
Okay.
rectangle that goes into each side. So you could, the one on the upper side goes onto the wood deck, so you could take a
I
wheelchair
see.
onto the wood deck that way.
Okay. Mr. Schutz?
Thank you. The access, having the wood ramp access, or the wood platform at the
You have
end
to
of
pull your mic closer.
having the wood platform at the end of the access ramp is far more convenient than having the ramp end in grass for most accessibility issues. So wherever ramps access in areas, it's helpful to have a entrance platform and use that platform to then access the rest of the area. I like on many of the designs, as we look at some of the others, having that perimeter access, wheelchair access is important. Getting to the center of those areas isn't necessarily as always important, so it's helpful to have that perimeter very accessible.
Mm-hmm.
Ms. Allen?
Number 7, the floodable plaza with water jets. Now, I've seen kind of the fountain down at Seattle Center that's, it's not necessarily holding water, the surface where the jets are coming out. I'm interested in the floodable concept. Is this meant to, is there an option to fill it up and have it retain water for kids to play in, or is it the water sprays and it goes back down into the grates and then they wait for it to spray again, and more like a sprinkler kind of arrangement?
I think this one is intended to be floodable, and that's how you get that interesting sort of pond shape out of it. But it's not deep. It's just maybe a couple of inches, so that it's more a thing that you would run around and kick in. You're not going to try to swim in it.
More like those kiddie pools at Green Lake that they have in the summertime that are just zero surface. You just walk in and a few inches of water. Okay.
So let's look at the art now. Oops, go back. So the artist is looking at 2 elements in this. The pavilion itself, as well as the edge of the Great Lawn. And this is some of her thinking of, bringing in the ideas of the bog, the cranberries, the sky. And so she begins by looking at the pavilion, and remember this is a disc which is envisioned to be perhaps metal of some kind, and it has projectors underneath on the underside of the disc. And then light or images could be projected down onto the floor surface, as well as reflected back up onto the ceiling. Then on the circle, the Great Lawn itself, along the edge of the wooden platform, she had the idea of using this as a place for text. And you can see the bronze letters on the lower left side as just an idea. But her concept was to work with the poet laureate of the city to either write something specifically for this event or for this location, or to find a piece of poetry or a phrase or something to put in this location. Let me go back because I feel like I missed one of the art pieces. The interesting thing about this, you can see the lines that are drawn away from the disc, and they actually have posts outside that are then supporting the disc up in the air. So it's a really unusual arrangement. And she was going to be working with the engineer, structural engineer, to start working out how feasible that is and how to
Almost
make
like
it
it'd be
happen.
dangling or hanging.
Suspended,
yeah.
right. So concept B, the second one, is based on this idea of the layers of peat. So after a bog dies, it's compressed for many years and then eventually disintegrates and becomes peat. And so in fact, we still have peat soils on this site today. And that's something that we'll actually have to work with during the design phase because it does influence how wet the surface is. But in this instance, they used this layering idea as a jumping off point for the idea for this park. And so they've used the rectilinear patterns, and they are overlapping in different directions in some cases. So this is kind of a classic park design. It has a very urban and contemporary feel to it. So in this case, I think they're calling it the meadow here, is a long rectangle, and then it's edged along that bottom or southern edge with another of the wooden platforms, as well as a stone seating wall at the top edge. The platform then is the longer gray rectangular shape. And then what's really interesting about this one is that the pavilion and the meadow are joined by this really sculptural water feature. And we'll see another photo, I think, or drawing that will show this in a better light. But this is a really interesting, I guess, combination of different rectangular bodies. Then the plantings are also laid out in the allée form that we saw in the previous version. The ground plane is pretty interesting too because they're visualizing this as pavers, but in a pixelated form. So it's got that sort of tie back to the digital world. This one shows in the upper right corner, it's not labeled, but that gray box next to the property line is actually a restroom building. So in this case, again, some photos to illustrate the ideas here. So
Ms. Allen has
Just a question, because I actually, you reminded me when you said that of the previous design. Is there a restroom feature in each of the three options?
There isn't right now, but that is the one thing that we have asked them to be sure to do that, and just so we can see how it lays out.
Mr. Flynn?
Just to get a sense of scale here, the plaza, or the area to the left of the meadow that's sidewalk or whatever you want to call it, do you have a sense how wide that is? Is that like 20 feet, 30 feet, 40 feet?
You know, we need to measure that. I'm not sure what it is, but it is a large space, and so that is one of the other things that came up before, that we might want to add some low plantings to kind of green that up, so that it doesn't look quite so blank. But it's that balancing act between leaving room for stages and making it a inhabitable place. So this again shows some of those ideas of here are the children playing in just a inch or two of water. And then at the bottom middle, there's that idea of the bosque of trees where you would have the movable table and chairs that people could eat at. Oops. So in this one, the two art options are the pavilion and the water feature. And she begins with this idea of the trees as the backdrop, something to sit on, and then the water. And you begin to see how the the pavilion takes form with this really unusual scrim, it's called, which is like a fabric, what'd you call it, covering, or?
Sort of a gauzy covering.
Right, and that it would also be similarly lit with projected digital images or colors. And then you see on the middle row there, on the left end, the water wall. And so this would be water that's coming down almost in a mist, and there's like a little wire mesh that the water falls along, and it makes it sparkle. And then this could also be have light projected on it and be really interesting colors.
Is the concept that you could interact with that water that's dropping down? I mean, I keep going back to Westlake Park in Seattle, and there's a water feature there, and there's actually a little path you can walk through the middle of that. And this time of year, as the bus pulls up every day, I'm seeing dads and moms with their kids going through, and it's just a neat little thing to do. Now, obviously, you wouldn't do that in the winter, but it's just a really, and it's interactive. And so I think as you watch a young person go through there, they're excited when they come through the other end because they made it through without getting all wet. But they get a little wet, that's okay too.
Right. Right now it's not laid out that way, but that might be a piece of input that we give her. What there is at the ground plane, if you look at that photo on the bottom right, she's got this idea that it would be something like that, not that exactly, but to have a little bit of bumpiness to it so that you would walk through that as well.
Mr. Schutz has a question.
I was going to ask for clarification. When I originally saw the drawings, I thought that perhaps the orange materials were a three-dimensional topographical, like upside-down mountains, but it sounds like maybe they're intended to be more of two-dimensional sheets of fabric hanging. But I thought drawn to the three-dimensional topographical aspect of it really added a whole different feel to. I mean, I thought it was very creative going that way. But maybe it's not. I could see how it'd be difficult to maintain.
Or there are clouds above the mountains.
Yes, there you go.
Right.
No clouds.
Depends where you stand.
Yes, and we will definitely be talking about maintenance as we get deeper into this. So then the final concept is something of a hybrid between the previous two. And so this is based on this idea of plant succession, and which is also kind of an in-between time. And so the lines are arced instead of being straight or very rounded. So in this one, you see the pavilion is actually at the lower left corner, kind of the boomerang shape, and then it's bracketed with a similar raised patio in the upper right corner. So it's kind of a nice way to give some enclosure to the interior part of the site. In this case, the meadow has got an edge, not wood in this case, but actually granite, and this whole layout of the meadow is at ground level. The one thing that is raised is that little, I keep calling it boomerang, on the upper right corner. That is a raised bench that kids could sit on, or they could play in the water and then get back out and sit on the bench for a little while. This one is different in that the circulation pattern has got these sort of wedge-shaped paving areas with trees in between them, and I've got a photo later that shows you kind of what that looks like from not the overhead view, and they're actually becoming pretty popular, and it's kind of a cool idea. So the idea here is that you would come from the corner of 161st and Cleveland through the pavilion, which it's very open in this case, and it serves as kind of an gateway to the site. Here you see some of the wood bench platform ideas repeated, as well as the water jets. Oops. In this instance, the art is the pavilion, as well as these little individual pods that are scattered throughout the sort of dining zone. And the artist used the maple tree as a beginning idea for this, and that idea of sitting under a tree and feeling sheltered by the tree, and then also looking at the winged seeds, the samaras from the maple tree, for the little smaller individual seating areas. So up above, you see the pavilion there, and then the little samara type pods are at the bottom. As she begins her exploration of this piece, she started thinking about the pavilion being a place of warmth and shelter, and so she threw out this idea of actually having it connected to a geothermal source, and so that it actually is warm. And then for the smaller little pods, her idea is that when someone sat under them, they would somehow begin to glow. So that's where you see the color coming in. Oops. So let me go back. Do we have any questions on that concept before I go ahead?
I have a question. So if you go back to the previous slide, or the one with the...
This one?
No, the one with the canopy.
Okay.
So you have
This guy?
that, the top one is the pavilion.
Right.
The bottom ones would be clustered through the park or specific to an area within the park. I couldn't quite figure that out.
Okay, let's go back then to this one. See the little red circles on the right side?
Okay.
Kind of scattered through the,
Okay.
I call it the picnic area.
That's where those would be.
That's where these are.
Sort of scattered throughout the area where you could get some seating.
Yes.
Okay. Ms. Allen.
So it would be anticipated that would be like sort of covered seating for folks, or would those just be kind of sculptural?
I think they're more sculptural. Is that the impression you get?
That's the sense I got, and just based on the scale, I don't think you're going to get much cover out of it.
Okay.
And actually, this one has sort of a much more limited amount of covered space than the other two that had kind of a simpler geometry.
Yeah.
So the other thing, B, is that where the pavilion is located in comparison to where the stage is located, appears that it could possibly interfere with the sight lines from, a part of the meadow toward the stage. Now, I don't know exactly how the pavilion's going to look, whether it's going to be open and pillars and whatnot in there. So that's hard to say what it exactly will look like. But that's the concern, and you wanted to know some of the pluses and minuses
Exactly.
with this, and I could see that as a minus.
This one I think is intended to have that center pylon where you see the circle, and so that you wouldn't have too many posts, I don't think, in the way. But you're right that it would intrude into that stage area a little more.
Ms. Allen.
Well, a couple of things. Also, it's right where you are envisioning everyone
Walking in.
Accessing the park. So it's right at the entrance. You're heading under the pavilion, and I don't know how that works in terms of circulation. The other observation I have is that on this, the pixelated surface is the one in the previous slide. The B concept was very bright and very white, prominent, and this looks like the reverse. And I like this better. Having that stark white pavement jump at your eyes, I think. Not that we get all that much sun around here, but I kind of like the muted stuff better. And then the third thing is I would hope that the geothermal piece of this pavilion would be have an on and off switch for weather like today.
You don't want an extra
warm is good.
40 degrees.
Overly hot is not. We're not used to it.
Okay.
Mr. Schutz.
I also wanted to ask about, build on that comment on the access in that corner, the traffic flow, as well as having it kind of the busiest intersection of the park versus the other two covered areas are more in the quiet area of the park. Was there thinking why to provide a contrast there in options, or?
Well, we were trying to explore what happens if you put it in different places.
Not a different intended use, or I mean, it would have a different use, but
It would. I think. Did you
Well,
have something to add?
I was going to say also that southeast corner of the park and the extension of Brown Street, which is kind of about the 2/3 point, both lead to really active spots on the Redmond Central Connector. So we expect there'll be a lot of traffic up both those streets to this park. So it's sort of, I think this one kind of celebrates that corner as an entrance,
Right.
and
It's a
is,
staging
makes
area.
the pavilion as a draw to the park. But that's one of the purposes of the different alternatives, to see what resonates with people.
thank you.
And one idea on this too was that this pavilion could actually be like a stage for a smaller performance too.
Mr. Carson.
So we also have property across the street, right? That is
We do to the west.
to the west. Is there anything planned for that?
Well, we explored the idea of how could that support park development early on, and the conclusion so far is that is such a challenging site to redevelop that we'd actually rather package that with a private development on the corner to give them a more useful shaped site. But we're exploring, as a condition of some potential future city sale to a property owner, conditioning that sale on certain sorts of amenities that we would like for the park. So, for example, one option would be to have a public restroom in that building rather than take up Park Place. And of course, this would all be things that you would have to consider in a sale, but that would discount the value of the sale, but it would give us a place for an amenity. Or park-related support facilities, or performance-related support facilities on a portion of that building. So I think the sense right now is we're trying to make up a list of what things we would really be interested in having that would support park development, but not use it as part of the park site. But that's just where we are right now.
Right, because it kind of seems like, given, if we go back to the kind of the overhead view, so you can go back to that one would work. So it's to the far left on the other side of the street. So basically, I mean, this, the optional stage there indicates that you'd obviously be closing the street. So, but you could even put the stage further and do like seated, folding chairs or bring your own chairs or whatever on the actual pavement, because nobody's going to want to sit on that on the ground.
Yeah.
But and then people sitting in the grass behind it. So the stage is even a little further.
Exactly.
So that,
In all these options, we've considered the ability to close that section of 161st Street, as we've talked about for years, or I think the northern lane of Cleveland Street adjacent to the park as well. The southern lane needs to be open for access to the condominiums on the south side of Cleveland Street, but we could close the northern portion of Cleveland Street if it was necessary also, or valuable to support activities at the park.
Mr. Stillen.
So one idea I had for that piece of property is something I saw when I was in downtown Seattle a couple of weeks ago at Boren and Pine. There is a dog park, and I thought it was pretty funny. Somebody pointed out it's covered with pea gravel, and one of the things that I guess I'm concerned every time I've gone down for a park event, like the last time we went to Open Signals, I watched somebody bring their dog out and just take a dump on the grass and leave. And I know we had fun cleaning up for one of the Lucineer things, and I'm just wondering if we should do something, like I'm not really fond of having dogs running all over this park and making a mess of it, but we're gonna have dogs downtown, and maybe we should look at making a dedicated facility where people can take their dogs out and let them be dogs. And so I would just say if somebody could take a look at the feature that Seattle put in at Boren and Pine and say, is that something we could fit in there? Because as you get more and more people down there with pets, they're going to be taking them somewhere. And I would sure hate to have our signature park be the dog bathroom. And I'd rather give pet owners a place to take their pets. And if that sliver could be used for that, I just would like to see that looked into if that's feasible, because somewhere along the line that's going to become a real problem downtown.
we're watching very carefully how the various facilities we're building in downtown are being used. And one of the things we've been spending a little bit of time talking about is what sort of information kiosk / dog waste pickup bag / depository, what sort of urban amenities are necessary to make all of our parkland downtown function better. And we have one little bag stand that's pretty unappealing visually, but it's right at the corner of the downtown park property, to try to encourage people to do the right thing. So it's sort of, and I've seen that park at Boren, which is a great amenity for people in downtown where they're even more constrained. But we're sort of watching how people are using the Rookery, how they're using the Redmond Central Connector and Downtown Park to figure out how to avoid that problem that you're pointing out.
Okay. Ms. Allen?
Well, I'd second Mr. Stillen's idea to take a peek at it, because as those buildings fill up with families and people who have dogs, whether they have kids or not, they're going to have a dog. That big central open grassy area, whatever shape we build there, is going to become a very attractive place to just put your dog off the leash and let him go. And early in the morning, let him out. That kind of a thing. And so if we have some sort of a facility where dogs can be dogs, as Mr. Stillen says, that's an immediate draw anyway. People, if you look at the usage over at any of the dog parks, they really, they're heavily used and appreciated. So I'd like to at least take a look at that.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll just follow up. I know we have the mitts and stuff out there, but a weekend ago, I took a walk through my neighborhood, and somebody's dog just left a pile right in the middle of the sidewalk. So I know most pet owners are pretty good about it, but like I say, all it's got to take is, and actually that was my first contact with this city council a number of years ago when my kids were playing up at Rockwell, and they took dog poop all through my car, my house, and everything. All we need is one person down here to have that experience ruin the night, and that's what I don't want to happen. I want to have people feel they can come down there, sit down in the grass, and really enjoy the park without any kind of interruptions.
Mr. Carson.
Well, maybe that's a good interim use for the other side of the street, where you can basically put out a sign that says, it's okay, pick up after yourself, and here's the materials to do it with, to keep them effectively, out of, not accidents, but dogs are going to go where they want to go, but the owner can control that to some degree. So,
Mr. Myers?
Are we kind of ready into general comments for all the designs?
Let me get to, I think I've got a slide that's got all three. There we go.
There we go. Mr. Myers.
Well, there's a couple of things. When we originally started talking about this park, there was going to be a public-private partnership for funding and for design. The city was going to donate property and some development, and then there were going to be private funds to help build that. And I know that model is not available. My concern with all three of these is that they are rather expensive designs that appear to be dependent upon being built all in one fell swoop. That we build this all at once, and that we have to have a certain amount of money in order that we even begin anything. So one of my concerns is I would love to see the park being built as quickly as possible. And I'm sorry that we no longer have the availability or the option of having outside funding helping us. But nonetheless, I still think that I'd like to see us moving ahead. So I'm wondering if more modular development would get us something sooner rather than later. My second point is looking at all three of these is they seem to be essentially freestanding designs rather than the center of the spider web of all of the art and recreation amenities that we have in downtown. And so there are, I like the Grand Lawn. I like to have a place where we can have a pavilion. I like the idea that we can put a stage, maybe Chateau Ste. Michelle type of low seating that people could bring themselves if they wanted. But I'm wondering about the integration with all of the other amenities that we have in downtown, and the interaction with all of those.
Actually, these are pretty well integrated. I think I didn't really go into that in this presentation, but in each one, there are 2 crosswalks crossing Cleveland Street that then go, one of them goes directly to the Redmond Central Connector. And then you see in the middle right of each, well, the top 2 versions, A and B, we're exploring how to connect to Leary Way, and to actually, we're experimenting with doing some layouts. We're going to be talking to the private owners of the adjacent properties so that we can create a better flow between the park and all of those properties. And then along the north edge, we want to create a planting strategy that goes all the way to Leary Way to the O'Leary Park, so that we're making as many connections as we can, both physically and visually too. So you'll be able to stand in the park and look down Brown Street and see the connector.
Mm. So if someone wants to go out and take a stroll and maybe do 20 minutes and do a mile, that they're going to be able to, not simply do laps around the small park.
Yep. Right, right.
Thank you.
Mr. Flynn?
When I looked at these 3 different concepts, I think about, right now, at least as I see the buildings that are going into the downtown and the streets, there's a lot of linear features already, I think, that are already there, which really, to me, I think in the concept A that had more of the round features, I think helped kind of break that up, and I think a great way. And I like the idea of kind of that raised lawn with the wood features around. I would agree with Mr. Meyer that the wood features I think are really attractive here. And something I did like the idea, at least at first, of this pavilion on the southeast corner of the park, because I was trying to imagine, as we convert to 2-way streets, that a lot more people are going to be flying through Redmond or driving quickly on Redmond Way. And coming into, that will be actually the northwest edge will be probably more visible in a way to a lot more people as they're coming through this. But, and so I had to think about, Cleveland Street's a lot quieter street. It should be. And so it kind of appealed to me that having that pavilion there was interesting, but I could see it really causing perhaps issues with that stage piece as well. And I thought the shapes there were maybe just a little bit too in between. I think the offset between the round and linear was much more kind of intriguing to me. I guess I'm curious about the cost and how, what that might look like. Are these achievable kind of costs that we have for us? And maybe we're too early to ask that question, but I think it's worth for us to think about. How could you stage it? I think that's a really a good question to ask. And I do like the water feature piece. I'm glad that there's a place for that. And the last thing I'll say is that the pavilion idea that the artist had there with the round disc with the reflection, I thought that was also pretty intriguing. I mean, if you could have it sort of look like it's floating there, that would be pretty unique, I think, and for a park like this. And in a way, it sort of, I think, integrates that, what you said earlier, which I thought was interesting. How do you integrate the kind of the hidden high-tech part of our city? And that might be one way to do it. Maybe even with I like the idea with the pavilion that had the geothermal or some solar or something in there that would, some way to include that I thought was kind of interesting. So those, I think those are, I really was, I guess, much more attracted to the concept A overall, but it really made me think a lot about the flow after we get done with the conversion of the one-ways to the two-way, because that does really transition this space, I think, differently and how we think about it.
Mr. Stellan?
Yeah, I'd pretty much echo all of that. The only thing I want to make sure I got that you said before about the stage is that you want to put it on the west side of the park because performers don't like to look in the sun, so the audience is going to look in the sun. And I got a real concern with it. I know when we performed out here for Anand de Mela that I guess I'd rather have 5 performers dealing with the sun than an audience of 1,000 people looking into the sun, squinting and not being able to see what's being performed on the show. So I guess I'd really think about that, because I'm trying to think of every stage that I've been involved in my life, and I got enough, like right now I got lights coming in my eyes, and I got to get used to it. So if this is going to be a venue where we think we're going to do a lot of performances, and it gets the reputation as you look into the sun, I don't think it'll pan out. I'd be really leery of that idea. So I'd rather see the performers suffer than 1,000 people.
What we've heard from Lisa Rhodes is that that performers just simply will not come to a venue.
They won't suffer. They won't come.
Yeah.
All right. So then you got a problem then.
But that's one reason we want to be sure that we can put stages in multiple locations on the site.
The concept, if you've gone to the Gorge, is that's a stage that faces east and the audience faces west. Mm-hmm. Same thing with the White River Amphitheater. The stage is, yeah, I mean, San Michelle, same. I mean, it's all, those are all, the performers are with the sun to their backs, essentially. Yeah. I had Mr. Schutzen and Mr. Myers.
Thank you.
And the other way around, but they start at 8 o'clock.
Maybe a good time to run down all the questions while we're echoing the other comments, and agree with Mr. Flynn's and Mr. Stillen's comments as well. If I were to put them in order of appeal and kind of their overall fulfilling the mission, I think option A, option C, and then option B, share the concerns and be able to stage the costs, share the concerns and be able to look at the long-term maintenance costs over it. I don't know whether one design or another, and whether the seasonal changes in one design or another adds a cost, but certainly look at those, I'm sure, as it evolves. I like A and C because they do contrast with the immediate linear surroundings, while they also echo kind of that second and third tier several streets away, a little more mixed feeling or organic feeling, and just particularly with the connector, how it echoes that and it does connect to that. The themes in A and C are also more inviting and motion-wise, and kind of a transience, more traversability. Option B, kind of requires you to follow the park's path rather than your path, whether you're cutting corners. Particularly A allows a lot of transients around the obstacles, or through the features. I shouldn't say obstacles, through the features. A and C also have a calmness to them, and spaces. The edges have a certain immediate functionality on the north end. That transients, the tree canal is meant to be traversed. The rest of the park is meant to be enjoyed and lingered. It also offers that shade and mixed shelter, and a sitting area, yet also that sense of when it's time to go, you can go. And the complexity of the shapes and the textures and the spaces easily create that variety of different activities, and accommodate different activities, and invite those different activities. Again, versus the linearity of B is a little more digital. Some of the things I like best, again, the features that allow the transients without impeding it, but also are inviting. The ones that look like they have some sort of variety within the seasons, or the plantings, and just the way that light will change in different seasons. The water features, I like the way they echo the verticality of our area rather than kind of the horizontal, where falling rain and growing trees, and I like the verticalness of the water features that they've suggested so far. Also like the smooth transition, all of them, along Cleveland Street, again inviting folks to linger, and the south and southwest or southeast part of the park is meant to be more of a time spent, versus the other is transitional. The significant corner on the southwest side, again inviting and connecting to the connector, and also being a staging area, and have less density. It again allows more transients through that. I'm a little unsure in each of the designs about the degree of kind of visual elevation disruption, or maybe the lack thereof. The choice A with the high pavilion allows more height within the park. I think that provides, again, more seasonal change with lighting, and as you look at from different areas, whether you're in the apartments or traversing the streets, having some visual disruption, visual altitude change within the park is appealing, in addition to the trees, and obviously those will add something. And then the last thing to touch on, again, is kind of the accessibility within the park. I do like the raised grass areas, meadows, or lawn area. It is an accessibility issue for many, as we know. 2 inches doesn't seem like a lot, much less 2 feet, but that's a real barrier to a lot of folks. And again, being able to access the perimeter of that space in a fairly consistent way, and not have just one spot you can go to be accessible is I think, much more inviting and allows a lot different abilities to access the park. But overall, I think they're all terrific designs. I mean, it's wonderful to have a nice choice they instill a similar sense, but they all have very different feels to them. So it's great to have some choices.
Mr. Myers.
Well, the one technical issue was on which way the stage faces, and I know when the Mariners were designing Safeco that they did lighting angles, where's the sun, and all of that. But we have, what, a 200-foot elevation ridge to the west of us. So I'm not sure how anyone is going to be terribly affected by the sun, because they are not going to be looking into the sun. It'll be over the horizon by the time it's down into the view line.
We sit down
behind the buildings.
Yes. Yeah. Yes.
Well, behind the hill that we go over, Rose Hill, essentially.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Ms. Allen.
Well, these are all great designs. I concur about B being the least appealing of them all. I'd almost like to mix and match a little bit, because I love the circularity of the concept A Great Lawn, but I also like on the B, I like the C concept best of all, I guess. And if I could replace the meadow with the round circular lawn, I would be a happy camper, because I like the grouping of the trees and the seating in the bottom corner adjacent to the stone house. I think that's a great flow. But I just, that Great Lawn concept, the round one, is really, really attractive, I think. As is the pavilion, too, the round pavilion. I think that's kind of edgy and a very unique design. Right. So I would kind of, and so the only thing about concept A that, kind of is less appealing, one is the trees are very ordered in the area that adjoins this stone house, and I see that as a more activated space with the better vegetation, and also the other art and things interspersed in that area, because I'd like to see that really activated. That business has struggled for these many years, and it would love to see it just thrive and be have a synergy with the park.
Right.
And then. So those are pretty much, and I love the water features as well. And either one of them, from the A or the C concept, would be I think very attractive. But I just want to, for the record, I don't think that Mr. Schutz was talking about transients with a T at the end. It was with a CE at the end. Because as I listened to where the transients would go, I think I just want to.
Transients of users.
Means people
right. I just
walking onto and through and out of. Yes.
Yep. Okay. Just want to have the record straight.
Residents. All right. So. Miss Allen just totally stole my thunder. She said exactly what I was going to say. I really like concept A. I like the circular patterns. I love the pavilion. The suspended pavilion just really intrigues me. I agree with everybody else what their comments are on concept B. I think it's just it's a traditional park, and we should probably be thinking more than a traditional park here. I understand you have to throw that concept out there. What I did like about concept B was the pavilion and the water feature next to the pavilion. If there was some way to, and again, I'll echoing what Ms. Allen said, try to create a hybrid of the hybrid, if you know what I'm saying. But what intrigues me the most about concept C and what I like the least about concept A are the trees in the southern part of the park. I would try to create disorder out of that order in the southern part of the park, and by sort of mixing in, if you will, the trees in the south, I guess that's the southeast corner, sorry, of concept C with concept A. So if you could somehow make that work, and I love the idea of having little respite spots with a little bit of art mixed in there and around there, and because I think that adds to the flavor of the park as opposed to everything's orderly, you move through and get out of there. No, we want people to linger. We want them to hang out a little bit and find a place to play, as it were. And when I first saw all these designs, the first thought that came to mind was, I'd like more grass. If there was some way to somehow supersize the grass and still make it all work, that's a concept I would heartily endorse. Because I think this is, right now, it's just a giant meadow. And we are, while we are doing great work in terms of the central connector and some of the other work we're doing in downtown to preserve as much open space as possible, where it's not paved, if you will. Having more green space in this park, I think, is a concept I would endorse heartily. But again, so my take is very similar to where Miss Allen is in terms of a bit of a hybrid between concepts A and C, pick the best of both. And obviously, we somehow have to find a way to pay for it. Let's not kid ourselves. And so that detail, that's the devil in the detail we have to get to eventually.
And I did want to say our consultant does think that this could be phased. I mean, it may not be ideal, but if necessary, the pavilion, for example, could come later.
Okay. Mr. Carson, you had a follow-up?
Well, no, I actually
haven't had a chance to go yet.
So I actually like the way Miss Allen put it. There were a couple of things, though, so I like the floating pavilion idea, although I just looked on the internet while we were talking about it, and I can see no place where anybody's ever done this. There may certainly be, but it looks to be an engineering kind of challenge, and with our rainfall, I think it'd probably have to be tilted a little, and and then I actually don't like it over the water feature because I don't see what necessarily the utility is going to be. If someone's going to get wet, they're going to get wet. The whole point of the pavilion to me is a place where people can hang out and be dry if in February. So, and then with the rows of trees. So yeah, I don't really like the way A is laid out. I do like the way C is laid out, except that I think it'd be interesting to have punctuated little gaps on the north side, so you can kind of get a glimpse of what's going on, even as they're smaller trees. As they grow, you're going to be able to see them, but initially they, so it just seems like a hedgerow initially, depending on the kind of tree, and but that's from above. It's hard to tell what it would look like from street view. So, and yeah, I mean, I do like kind of the hybrid of A and C as well. So
okay.
And I was going to say one last thing is, to your point, it seemed like there wasn't quite enough natural environment. Too much, just a little too much in the way of building materials that instead of a little more grass and areas like that. But both A and C seem to have a lot of different areas to be in. I think, pretty much everybody said, the thing that struck me about B that was just not appealing was it's very geometric, and it just is not that appealing.
Mr. Stillen.
So one thing this park kind of strikes me like is I mentioned to Mr. Myers, it's kind of like Union Square in some ways in San Francisco, and maybe we could get some pictures, because the comments that were made about the trees being orderly. I think of a park I was in Rotterdam where the trees were pretty orderly and the tables under it and the restaurant, how that worked together. So if we could get, if you could get some similar, like you had photos before, but maybe some actual parks that people could look at, I think that would help put the concepts together. Because even when I think of Union Square, is there something we could do under this park? Could we get anything? I've realized we got a high water table, but Union Square, I think, is a parking lot, and so. But if you could get us some photos to show what other cities have done and how they've used this, I think that would be really helpful in kind of seeing how the ideas play out.
Mr. Myers.
Well, just briefly, the thing that is attractive to me about concepts A and C is that there are a number of different places that people can go. They can either have their favorite space, or they can have a different aspect and move around and have
right.
and have privacy and openness at the same time. And if we're going to do it like Union Square in San Francisco, can we have a mime-free zone?
Yes, I think we can guarantee that.
And clown.
We'll work on that ordinance, Hank.
Mime and clown free.
So I will wrap up with staff and say, have we given you some ideas? You asked 3 questions at the beginning. Did you get responses to all 3 of your questions?
I think we do.
Okay, very good. Thank you. Thank you. Good work.
Thank you.